I've sat on this bench for over 40 years, and I can tell you this. The loudest people in the room are often the most scared of the truth. Before I tell you what happened when a rapper's son marched into my courtroom with an entourage like it was a red carpet event, can you do me one quick favor and tell me, have you ever seen someone try to intimidate a judge in real life? It was a Tuesday in Providence, and the hallway outside courtroom 3 smelled like old paper, coffee, and nerves. My clerk handed me the docket at 8:41 a.m., and one case number jumped off the page like it wanted attention. Case number 24, TR 1873, reckless driving, failure to yield, leaving the scene of property damage. That last one always makes my stomach tighten. When someone leaves, it usually means they knew they did wrong. A few minutes later, my court officer leaned in and told me, "Judge, we got a situation in the lobby." I asked what kind of situation. He said cameras like phones everywhere, a group of guys wearing chains. One of them says he's here for content. I looked up from the file and felt that old, familiar heat in my chest. Not anger, something else. The feeling you get when you know someone is about to treat a serious place like a joke. And then the doors opened. First came the sound. Not footsteps. Laughter. Loud talking. The kind you hear outside a nightclub at 1:30 a.m. Then I saw him. Darius Rio King, age 19. And I don't say this to be mean. I say it because details matter. He did not walk into my courtroom like a kid who made a mistake. He walked in like a prince who expected the room to bow. He had a black Amiri hoodie with the glittering logo across the chest. And when he turned, I caught the flash of a Louis Vuitton sling bag. Not a fake one either. I've been around long enough. You can tell the difference by the stitching and by the way people hold it like it's a newborn baby. His shoes were Dior B23s, spotless like they never touched a sidewalk. On his wrist was a Rolex, silver, bright, loud, and around his neck was a chain so thick it looked like a bike lock dipped in gold. Behind him came 4 young men. One wore a bright orange Hermes belt like it was a trophy. Another had sunglasses on inside the courtroom, which is the kind of move that tells you someone thinks rules are for other people. They weren't just friends, they were an entourage, a moving wall of attitude. And then, as if the room was not already full enough, 2 more people squeezed in behind them. A woman with long nails tapping her phone like she was texting during a movie, and a thin man with a ring light clipped to a small tripod whispering, "We going viral today." My court officer stepped forward and said, "No filming in here." The thin man smirked and said, "It's just for the story, bro. Bro, that word in a courtroom always lands wrong. It doesn't belong here, like gum under a church pew." I kept my face calm. I always do. My father taught me something when I was a boy. He said, "Frank, never raise your voice to prove you're right. If you're right, you don't need to." I carried that into this job, and it saved me more times than I can count. But I also learned another thing. A courtroom is not a stage. It is not a club. It is not a place where you test how far you can push an old judge because the court pushes back. The prosecutor that day was Miss Lom, sharp, calm, always prepared. She stood up, glanced at Darius and his group, and I could tell she already didn't like the energy. Defense counsel was Mr. Blakely, a private attorney with a clean suit and tired eyes. He looked like a man who had been hired to do damage control for someone who refused to be controlled. Then I looked at the victim's name in the file. Mr. Leonard Vega, age 63, U.S. Army veteran, retired, working part-time as a hospital transport aide at Rhode Island Hospital. The kind of job where you push patients in wheelchairs and gurneys, and you do it for modest pay because you still want to be useful and you still need the money. And there was more. Leonard Vega was also raising his granddaughter Maya, age 8, because his daughter had passed away 2 years earlier. Pneumonia that turned into something worse. That's what the note said. He was living on a fixed income, and he was behind on heating bills. He had a heart condition and carried nitroglycerin pills in a small bottle on his keyring. I've seen men like Leonard, quiet men, men who don't ask for pity, men who did their time in life and didn't complain. It was my job to look at the defendant and then look at that victim and remember that both are human beings. But it was also my job to remember the difference between a mistake and a pattern. The incident happened on October 11th at exactly 10:47 p.m. at the intersection of Broad Street and Clayton Avenue. A busy corner, street lights that flicker sometimes, a bus stop, a small corner store. Leonard Vega had finished a late shift. He had his hospital badge still clipped to his belt. Badge ID RH200791. He was driving a 2008 Honda Civic Blue with a dent already on the left rear quarter panel. The file said he was going 22 mph in a 25 zone. Slow, careful. Darius Rio King was driving a Lamborghini Urus. Matte black custom rims, tinted windows darker than the law allows. I later learned it was registered to a company tied to his father's label, not in his name. In a company name, which is a trick rich people use. It helps them pretend nothing belongs to them. According to Officer Hannah Doyle, badge number 417, Providence Police, Darius ran the stop sign and cut across Leonard's lane. Leonard hit the brakes, but the Urus clipped the front of his car like it was swatting a fly. The impact spun the Civic half a turn. Airbags didn't deploy, but Leonard's chest hit the steering wheel hard enough to leave a bruise the size of a grapefruit. And then, while Leonard sat there shocked with his hands shaking, the Lamborghini didn't stop. It kept going. That's the part that gets me. If you crash into someone, you stop. You check if they're alive. Even if you're scared, even if you're guilty, you stop because you're a person. But he didn't stop. Leonard called 911 at 10:49 p.m. The recording said you could hear his breathing, short, shaky. He told dispatch, "I'm okay, I think. I'm dizzy." The other car left. It was a black Lamborghini, I think. Who has a Lamborghini? Who has a Lamborghini? A man working part-time at a hospital asked that question like it was a riddle, like it didn't belong in his world. The next day, Leonard missed work because his chest hurt, and Maya missed school because he didn't trust leaving her alone. He went to urgent care. They told him he had bruised ribs and a strain near his sternum. They gave him pain pills and told him to rest. But rest is expensive when you're raising a kid and you don't have paid leave. That was the setup. And then Darius showed up in my courtroom acting like the whole thing was an inconvenience. When the clerk called the case, Darius didn't step forward right away. One of his friends said something and they all laughed. It was like they were waiting for applause. I watched him. I watched the way he moved, the way his eyes slid across the room, not really seeing people, just counting them, counting who mattered. "Mr. King," I said, "step up." He came forward slow, like he was doing me a favor. Mr. Blakely moved with him. I asked, "How do you plead to reckless driving, failure to yield, and leaving the scene of property damage?" Before the lawyer could answer, Darius leaned toward the microphone and said, "Not guilty, obviously." Obviously, the word hung in the air. A few people in the gallery murmured. Leonard Vega was sitting on the wooden bench with his hands folded, looking straight ahead like he was trying not to cry in public. His jacket was clean, but worn at the cuffs. He had the posture of a man who spent years taking orders and learned how to hold himself still. I looked at Darius and said, "You're in my courtroom. You'll let your attorney speak." Darius smirked. He nodded like he understood, but the smirk stayed. Miss Lom stood up and said, "Your Honor, the Commonwealth is ready. We have the reporting officer present. We also have traffic camera footage and evidence of damage consistent with a hit and run." Darius turned and whispered something to his friends. One of them laughed loud. My court officer stepped forward and I held up a hand. I wanted to see how far they'd go without me saying a word. Sometimes people reveal themselves if you let them talk. Miss Liam continued, "The defendant was operating a matte black Lamborghini Urus. We have a partial plate from the traffic camera. The vehicle was later located at 2:23 a.m. in a private garage on Harrison Street with fresh damage to the front right bumper and rim." Darius shrugged like she was describing the weather. Miss Lom looked right at him and said, "The victim is present, Mr. Vega." Leonard stood slowly. He didn't glare. He didn't point. He just stood and said, "Good morning, Judge." His voice was steady, but his eyes looked tired. The kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. I said, "Good morning, sir." Then I looked at Darius again and asked, "Do you understand what leaving the scene means? It means you hit someone and decided your time was more important than their safety." Darius leaned in and said, "My time is important." Yeah, there it was. I heard a soft gasp from somewhere behind him. Maybe the woman with the nails. Maybe someone else. But that line changed the air in the room. It went from tense to electric. Mr. Blakely cleared his throat fast. "Your Honor, my client is young. He may not be expressing himself properly." Darius cut him off. "Man, I'm expressing myself fine." I turned slightly toward the entourage. One of them had his phone half lifted, not filming openly, but angled like he was ready. I said, "No phones. Put them away. If I see one more device up, I will clear the room." They froze for a second. Then one of them rolled his eyes and stuffed the phone in his pocket. Miss Lom asked to play the video. The clerk queued it up. The footage showed the intersection, the Civic, the Urus, the stop sign. The Urus didn't even slow down. It cut like a knife, and the Civic jolted and spun. You could almost feel Leonard's body hit the wheel just by watching. Then the Urus sped off. Miss Lom said, "For the record, the defendant's speed is estimated at 48 miles per hour in a 25-mile zone, based on frame-to-frame analysis from the traffic camera." Darius laughed. "Actually laughed," he said. "That's cap." Miss Lom didn't blink. "Officer Doyle will testify that the defendant's vehicle was found with damage and the rim had blue paint transfer matching Mr. Vega's Honda Civic." Darius turned around and mouthed something to his friends. They snickered. And right then, I felt that moment I felt 100 times in my career. The moment when someone thinks they can bully the room into bending. They don't understand that the courtroom doesn't bend for fame. It bends for truth. Now do me a favor. I want to see who's really paying attention. I dare you to stay with me through the next part because the evidence didn't just get worse. It got personal. Officer Hannah Doyle stepped up. Badge number 417. She was direct and professional. She described arriving on scene at 10:56 p.m. She described Leonard's bruising and the way his hands shook when he handed over his license. She described finding bits of black plastic on the road and a small piece of a custom rim cap. Then She described what happened at 2:23 a.m. She said, "We received an anonymous tip from a garage attendant on Harrison Street. He reported a matte black Urus pulled in, front right bumper damaged, wheels scraped. The driver was a young male wearing a black hoodie. He was accompanied by multiple males. They appeared intoxicated," Darius scoffed. "Anonymous tip so anybody can say anything?" Officer Doyle looked at him and said, "We recovered surveillance video from the garage. The driver's face is visible. Ms. Lam played it. There he was, Darius, hoodie, chain, walking into the garage like he owned the building. In the video, one of his friends pointed at the damaged rim and laughed. Darius lifted his hands like, 'So what?' Then he said something. The video had no sound, but his mouth formed the words clear as day. 'I don't care.'" I watched Leonard Vega's face while the video played. He didn't look angry. He looked ashamed, like he couldn't believe he had to stand here and explain his pain to someone who thought it was funny. Ms. Lam said, "Your Honor, the Commonwealth is also introducing a repair estimate for the victim's vehicle. Total cost 384217s. The victim has liability-only insurance. He cannot afford the repairs." Leonard swallowed hard. His hands tightened together. I asked him softly, "Mr. Vega, what does this mean for you?" He looked at me and said, "It means I can't drive Maya to school. It means I can't get to the hospital to work. I've been taking the bus, 2 buses. It takes me an hour and 40 minutes. I'm not asking for sympathy. I did everything right." I nodded. "How long did you serve?" He said, 8 years, Your Honor. Army 1981 to 1989. Any deployments? He hesitated. "Not like the young guys today. But I served. I did what I was supposed to do." Then he added quieter, "My daughter would have known what to do. She always handled things better than me." That line hit the room. Even Ms. Liam's eyes softened. Darius shifted his weight and muttered, "Sad story." Mr. Blakely snapped his head toward him like, "Please stop." I leaned forward. "Mr. King, you will not disrespect this man in my courtroom." Darius leaned in too, matching my posture like it was a staring contest. "With all due respect, Judge, this is small time." Like, "Why are we even here? He's fine." Leonard flinched at the words, "He's fine," like someone was rewriting his pain in front of him. I said, "Let me explain something to you. He's fine is not your call, and the moment you left that scene, you stopped being the person who decides what matters." Darius smiled. "You acting like I ran somebody over." Miss Lam's voice cut in. "Your Honor, the victim sought medical care. Bruised ribs, chest trauma documented at urgent care on October 12th at 9:18 a.m. Provider, nurse practitioner Celeste Ward." Darius waved his hand. "Bruised ribs, that's like regular." I felt my patience narrow into a point. Not because of me, because of what he was doing to Leonard, humiliating him, turning him into a joke. I looked at the entourage. One of them whispered, "This old dude tripping." Another laughed, not quietly. I turned to my court officer. "Step closer." The officer moved in. I said loud enough for the whole room, "This is your last warning. One more outburst from anyone back there and they will be removed. Do you understand?" They nodded, but the nods were fake. Like kids nodding at a teacher while planning to misbehave again. Ms. Lam wasn't done. She introduced the defendant's phone records. Not the content yet, just location pings. The Urus was at Broad and Clayton at 10:47 p.m. Then it moved fast. Then it was on Harrison Street. Darius whispered, "That don't prove I was driving." Miss Lam turned to Paige. Then we will move to the next exhibit. And I saw Mr. Blakely's shoulders sink like he already knew what was coming. Miss Lom said, "The garage attendant, Mr. Salvatore Grasso, will testify that the defendant handed him a $100 bill and said, 'Don't say nothing.'" Darius snapped, "That's a lie." I looked at him. "You don't get to testify by yelling." He looked right at me and said, "Man, you don't get to talk to me like I'm broke." There it was again. Class, money, like it was armor. I stayed calm. Money is not a shield in here. He smirked. "It is everywhere else." The room went quiet. Even the entourage stopped because that line was a confession of mindset. He believed the world had been bought, and he believed I was for sale too. That's when my clerk handed Miss Lom a small printout, and I saw her expression change. Not surprise, more like, "This is worse than I thought." She said, "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to introduce social media content posted by the defendant at 11:12 p.m. on October 11th. Darius's smile faltered for the first time. He said, Nah, that's not." Miss Lom held up the printout. Instagram story, username, or Rio King official verified account. The story shows the interior of a Lamborghini with visible damage on the passenger side dashboard reflection, and the caption reads, "Hit a broke boy whip, LOL." Leonard's face drained. He gripped the bench to steady himself and the entourage. One of them let out a quiet, "Oh, they knew. They had seen it. They just didn't expect it to be used in court." Ms. Lom continued. The next frame shows the defendant laughing with friends, and the caption reads, "Court tomorrow. I'm aware, my Dior, so the judge know I'm not one of them." I felt the sting of it. Not for me, but for what it said about the court. About the idea of equal justice. Darius looked around, suddenly aware that the room wasn't laughing with him anymore. Now, listen closely, because this is the part that made everyone lean forward later. You're going to want to hear what was hidden inside those posts, and why it blew the whole case wide open. Miss Lom said, "Your Honor, there is also a Snapchat video recovered pursuant to a search warrant signed on October 18th, warrant number SW249916. The defendant posted a video at 12:06 a.m. stating, 'I'll pay the ticket and go home. These old judges love money.'" End quote. Darius snapped, "That's taken out of context." I said, "What context makes that acceptable?" He shrugged, then leaned in and said, "You don't know my life, Judge. You probably never sat in a Lambo. You probably ride a bus like him." He pointed at Leonard when he said him. It wasn't just disrespect. It was a direct insult wrapped in class warfare. He tried to make poverty sound like a disease, and that's when my voice got very quiet. I said, "Young man, I grew up with nothing. My father worked until his hands cracked. I don't need a Lamborghini to know what dignity is." He smiled like he enjoyed pushing. Then Ms. Lom delivered the twist that turned this from a traffic case into something darker. The room changed again like someone opened a door to winter. Darius's entourage stopped moving. One of them looked down at his shoes. Another swallowed hard. Darius said, "Federal for what?" "For posting." Miss Lom said the content included serial numbers, packaging materials, and discussions consistent with trafficking. Homeland Security Investigations has been notified. Mr. Blakely's face went pale. He whispered, "Darius, shut up." But Darius couldn't. Pride doesn't know when to stop. He laughed. Too loud. Too fake. "Y'all trying to make me into some cartel or something? I'm famous." I said, "Famous doesn't mean immune." He leaned closer and said, "You just mad because you ain't never had money." You mad because you gotta wear that old robe while my dad got jets? My courtroom went dead silent. Even Leonard looked up, stunned. I took a breath. In my mind, I saw my father again. Simple man, honest man. He used to say, "Frank, never let a person's insult change your values." So I didn't answer the insult with an insult. I answered it with the law. I said, "Miss Liam, are federal authorities present?" And that's when the back doors opened. A man in a dark suit walked in, followed by another with a badge clipped at his belt. The badge caught the light. It wasn't local. It wasn't state. The agent stepped forward and said, "Your Honor, Special Agent Marcus Hines, HSI, credential number HSI 55804. He nodded to me, then looked at Darius like he was looking at a file folder with legs. Agent Hines said, "We have an active investigation tied to the defendant's social media. We are requesting the court remand the defendant pending further proceedings due to risk of flight." Darius's mouth opened, then closed. His friends shifted back like they suddenly didn't know him. The woman with the nails stopped tapping her phone. Mr. Blakely looked like he might sit down on the floor. Darius said, "Yo, this is crazy. You can't do that. My dad." And right on cue, as if summoned by those words, another figure stepped into the doorway. A tall man, expensive suit, diamond earrings, a face that had been on billboards. King Trell, the rapper, the father. I'd seen him in the news. Big tours, big talk, big money. A man who built a brand on being untouchable. He walked in with a manager and a bodyguard. The bodyguard scanned the room like we were all threats. King Trell didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just stared at his son with a look that wasn't love or hate. It was disappointment. He walked up and said, "Lo, Darius." Darius turned like a little kid caught stealing. "Dad," they trying to King Trell held up a hand. "Stop." One word, and the whole room listened, even Darius. King Trell looked at me and said, "Your Honor, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here because my son thinks my name can save him." He glanced at Darius. "It can't." Darius blinked like he didn't understand the language. King Trell continued, "You hit a man and ran. You thought it was funny. You posted it. You embarrassed yourself. You embarrassed me." The entourage looked like statues now. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. Reality had finally walked in wearing a suit. And that's when I knew the performance was over. If you're still here with me, you're part of the kind of crowd I respect. Like this story. If you believe a courtroom should be the one place fame can't buy silence. I looked at Leonard Vega. He was standing again almost by accident, like he needed to hold himself up. I said, "Mr. Vega, I want you to hear something." Then I looked at Darius. "Mr. King, you used money like it was a weapon. You used jokes like they were knives. You used your friends like a shield. And you used that man's pain as content." Darius whispered, "It was just a story." I said, "A story?" You know what Mr. Vega's story is? It's waking up at 5:30 a.m. to take 2 buses so he can earn enough to keep the lights on for his granddaughter. I paused. Your story is, you thought you were above consequences. Ms. Lom asked for conditions or sentencing on the traffic matters in restitution. Agent Hines requested the court hold the defendant for federal